Welcome, Meatsmiths. You're listening to a Meatsmith Harvest.
Restoring husbandry to prosperity.
By means of the traditions of our fathers. This dialogue picks up where we left off in our last episode's conversation. You can find part 1 on our website, YouTube, or iTunes. If the content resonates with you, please consider supporting our team by going to patreon.com/Meatsmith and donating a small monthly pledge. This goes directly toward more free media headed your way. Thanks for staying tuned for part 2. We've had the topic of community on our minds a lot. I'd say the last 6 months, and as you've been really, really busy in your busy season.
Yeah.
We'll bring something up with each other and then I'll file it away. We got to talk about this later. And it's because it's kind of mounting, just little circumstances that we've run into or, just being a homesteading person and family and wife, community is very much a part of your life. Just by virtue of the fact that you are a social person, and then you got to sell and being a business owner too. It's a very social kind of, you're not in an office job, or on computers all the time.
Well, and I think also if you're endeavoring to do any kind of small scale agriculture, you feel super alone and like you're going against a lot of forces that make it super difficult for you. And so you're like, maybe there's a group of people that are also doing this, that we could make this a little less impossible with each other.
Yeah. So we have felt kind of encouraged to talk about this topic. There's just so many things converging, both in our life, in our business, the life of our business, in our own personal communities that we're a part of. And both, homesteading, education, faith, our business, and then also we run a digital membership. So it's kind of own community. And then also at the beginning, 5 months ago, it was probably a long time ago. You're really behind on your email, right? And, well, you keep telling me that. I'm trying to.
It's so bad.
I stay out of it. But you told me about this email that came across you, and this was
which
forever
I can't
ago.
find.
I know.
It's such a good.
It was a really good
annoying
email. I know. It may have been an Instagram message or something. I don't know, but I tried to track it down. So if there's if you've written this to us, and you're listening to this, you'll know, and please get a hold of us again. And I'm sorry, but it was a question from, it sounded like a young dad, young family man. And he kind of laid out his situation, which was, he's got a really fabulous, church community, I think. And he's got maybe some younger kids. I don't think very many, and I don't think they're very old yet. It sounded like he's a little bit flexible. And they live maybe in the inner city or kind of maybe a suburban area, but they don't have a ton of land, but they kind of want a good amount of land. But they also have a really good church community, I think he kept stressing.
Yeah.
And yet he also has this pull for his children. Maybe, I was reading between the lines maybe, but they want to get out, but it would also mean leaving their current situation. And I don't know how their job factored into it, but anyway, it struck a chord with both of us, but I filed it away in my head because I think that question represented a lot of people.
Yeah.
And the question was, what should I do? Which first of all is I don't know why you're asking us, but it was a reach out for do you have advice? How do we weigh
how
the goods?
How did we make our decision? Yeah.
Yeah, and what's given priority here? Is it the land? Is it the community that you're a part of?
Mm-hmm.
Is it growing your own food even?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what takes priority? And these are really tough questions.
Yeah.
And we're not the people to be answering them for anyone, but we have made hard decisions that are about this topic. Mm-hmm. And so there's just needed to be some precision about what community means, mm-hmm. what it doesn't mean, what it offers, and what we need to be cautious of, and also what it can, the advantages of a good community.
Yeah.
But then also potential overreaches mm-hmm. that you just don't want to, you just want to be aware of going into a decision like this. Am I going to, how big of a factor does community play when you're making decisions that will affect your marriage, your family, and then your legacy?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think that was the choice that he was facing was a result of the fragmentation of our culture and its materialism and everything, which is common to all of us. Like, we all face that. And so you find in a disordered way, that it shouldn't be this way, we find ourselves having to choose between things like, it's either community or land. It's either or it's either land or being close to our parish church. Mm-hmm. Or, so you're constantly having to make these value judgments. What is the most important thing? Mm-hmm. Do I leave the land to be in the good community? Do I leave the community to be closer to a church? Like, these are really essential, and it's just a symptom of our fragmented modern culture that though we have to even pick those, we mm-hmm. have to pick.
Yeah.
Because we do.
And we I think that it's been over a decade since we've started wrestling with this, and you and I are in no way like experts on this, and there's no settled dogma, mm-hmm. for instance, on what community should be to you. But we have had some experience with engaging with communities mm-hmm. over the decades, and now we're 30. We're in our late 30s, so we've been adults for 2 decades now.
Whoa!
And so we've had some experience that maybe people in their young 20s want to hear. And but I'm just trying to build a caveat here. Like, we're not experts. We've made all the mistakes in the book, but I think that there are people asking us for our experience, mm-hmm. and also you and I. We look at people like Thomas Aquinas, and we read the Latin, and we're trying to come at it as faithful and honest a way as possible, looking at all the angles, mm-hmm. and we've had our own experience, to share. So that's what we wanted to talk about today.
There's we have been through a lot of communities. So speaking of the good of community, like, what is that? And that's kind of one of the things that people find themselves having to either leave or leave other things for, so it's mm-hmm. how do you pick?
Yeah.
And because we've been part of many different forms, actually. We have been through a lot of communities, mm-hmm. when you think about it. Mm-hmm. And since we are, ne'er-do-wells, we have been excommunicated from all of them. Not really. Not really. But no, we haven't at all. Actually, they've been mostly positive experiences, but we've been very close to different versions of people trying to fabricate unity with each other. Mm-hmm. And it is not so easy.
No.
It's not so easy. Mm-hmm. So we've known people and been real close proximity to intentional communities, which are literally like designed little villages mm-hmm. with a bylaws or some other more acceptable, less decisive version of that word. I don't know. Like basic covenants.
Yes.
That you have to, that you abide by in that community, where they have established conflict resolution, strategies for conflict between neighbors. And of course, these are communities that they embody a lot of ideals, like there's no cars, there's no driveways. You all park in a common parking lot outside of the little village, which is great. You know, it's much more pretty and human. So for those communities, you kind of buy into a list, basically a document of values, and then you can buy a house there and live there. And we have known people whose convictions have changed and have left those communities, and who found that the openness, the kind of there's lots of tacit rules in communities like that, unspoken, but nonetheless almost enforced or assumed, that can deprive the family of its own sovereignty. And so there's sort of this unspoken open door policy with everyone, because, hey, we're all on the same page. We all have the same values, right? And then you move in there and you become more and more Catholic, as Grace is wont to do to you in the midst of these communities. And you're like, no, actually, I don't want your kids over every day. And that can precipitate a break. And so you leave, you know, amicably. But so that's an example. We've been in little farming co-ops before where it's shoulder to shoulder. And we all, to each according to his need, from each according to his ability, almost, you know, where you put in a certain amount of work and you reap the harvest of your toil on a little farm with other people.
We built our house.
And that worked pretty well.
Yeah.
That little model. It was very small.
I think I only did it for a year or two. But,
yeah, that was good. Yeah, the key being it's not obligatory, which is good. And then, we built our house in a community. And that was not an intentional community in the sense that we didn't really have bylaws. It was just that we all had subsidized mortgages. Basically, the costs of our home were subsidized by a USDA grant. So it was affordable. And it wasn't really a grant. It was actually a loan, which they didn't tell us because you had to pay it back. So that was a little weird. Could have been a little more transparency there. But the only thing that united us all was, hey, this is affordable housing, and I'm willing to do the labor to build my house rather than pay a down payment to get into a house. And so that was actually how we got into that situation, became homeowners. But there were no values that tied us together at all beyond that. But we lived right next to each other.
Yeah.
And so there was lots of bruised toes, lots of stepping on toes, lots of not harmony. We were okay because we're generally kind of agreeable, passive people, but we did have pigs in our tiny yard at one point, and we got
our hands slapped for that.
Yeah.
Which is probably for the best.
We don't care. Yeah.
We shouldn't have had pigs.
Probably shouldn't have had pigs.
Probably,
in there.
yeah.
They did till up the lawn, but so. Vashon always, which is the island we lived on in Washington State, flattered itself as a tight community, as the community of Vashon. And it was not. There were two groups of people in Vashon. There were those that were not progressive and urbanite in their philosophy, and those were all the people that did all of the actual work on Vashon, like the builders, the excavators, the timber, the guys that felled all the trees,
Business owners.
Yeah, they were not united with the rest of Vashon's self-flattery. And so there was a pretty distinct divide there. And it was weird because all of the progressives needed the rednecks because the rednecks did all the work. And they kind of made it work. But yeah, so I guess those are... And we did sort of flatter ourselves for having something of an agrarian paradise. An agrarian utopia. Farm stands everywhere. Look at how good we are. We buy our local food from local farmers. And we did have a small Catholic church there. It was what we converted into. And there were a couple Catholic families that were also trying to be agrarian and Catholic. And we're trying to explore that, but all without, again, clear definitions or even knowing any of the church's teaching on any of it.
Yeah.
So we were just kind of making it up and trying to figure it out and manufacturing it. And which means you automatically imbibe concepts of community that are erroneous. Because if you don't fight against it, you're just going to be influenced by it.
Yeah.
You're just going to accept it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're ignorant, then the world will fill that void.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what's happened, I would say, in a number of different areas.
Yeah.
If to good, well-meaning people. Oh, yeah. People that certainly, people of goodwill, I would say.
Yeah.
And, yeah. So, and before we say anything, community, there are some good things that I want to point out that I think we have learned. I just want this to be well-rounded because there's some definite overreaches that our culture promotes in that word. That word has been hijacked, and that word is now it's morphed into some agendas.
Yes. In fact, I don't even like to use the word because it's almost its only function in usage today.
Yeah, that's right.
It is a weapon.
Yeah.
And the best example of this, I think, the most obvious one, not etymologically, but in usage, is it is a way to judge a group as a group, which is another thing that we call prejudice. So that's what it is. But because we don't say those guys or, the blank, add whatever group you're trying to use for your own argument or whatever, to make it acceptable to polite company. You can still talk about a group and you can still judge a group of people as if they are a homogenous, undifferentiated whole of automatons. You can do that if you use the word community. You can say the Black community, the Hispanic community, the whatever, the Catholic community. And it is a mechanism, I think, whereby you can get over that pesky and annoying requirement of being precise in your language to make a point. You don't actually have to be precise because community has positive connotations only. It's almost like an absolute good in our language. No one would say community is bad. Like, what's wrong with you? Community, we're so happy with each other. It's like, we're just so happy.
Yeah.
We have community. We share everything. So it's all very super over, like gallon of maple syrup positive. That if you use that in a way that permits you to judge an entire group of people, and it's not even judging them negatively, but instrumentalizing them to serve your argument, whatever it is, that's the most pernicious use of community. You can say whatever it is. And it's just a mask for the fact that you would like to make a hasty generalization and you would actually like to judge all the individuals of a group with one big brush. And use them for your particular ideology. But you can't say them, they, or any pejorative like racial slur or group slur or anything, but you still want to do it. You still want to use it. So you just say that blank community and you got it.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like a spoonful of sugar that lets the poison go down.
Yeah.
It's like now I can marshal these groups of people to mean, what I want them to mean.
Yeah.
So
I can define them.
Yeah.
To control them, honestly.
Yeah.
Is what ends up happening. Yeah.
For their benefit too, because it's like the way that community works, it means you can judge a group, but it's an immediate flattery to that group to call them a community. You've immediately flattered them as something that's beyond reproach, because a community is beyond reproach. It's just good in and of itself. It's manipulative.
Yeah.
And so you can actually, you can flatter them and adulate this group at the same time that you are judging them as all the same. And as a lacking individual specificity and precision.
It can come off a little bit patronizing.
Yeah. Well, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But because community is so positive, we don't notice. Anyway, that's how I think it functions ideologically.
Yeah, and that's kind of skipping to the punchline of what I was going to do at the end of the... So I'll just say it right now. It is a talismanic word.
Oh,
if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
It has become that.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's better, and maybe we can keep going forward talking about society. Society is a little bit more precise, and you can actually talk about different orders within society. There's the temporal order, there's the supernatural order, and they kind of work together to make human society. But you're right. Like a talismanic word, and this is coming from this gentleman, Plinio Oliveira Correa.
Cool.
And I'll talk about him later, but he talks about you can effectively convert people ideologically through a novel lexicon, through a use of a novel lexicon, like the words you use, the diction you use, by using talismanic words, terms that powerfully evoke but are never defined. And so there's this emotional component to using that word, and once you have an emotional element to what you're saying, rationality almost doesn't exist anymore. And so I was trying to come up with like an example. That old show we used to watch that I wouldn't recommend, but we use this phrase all the time. Somebody think of the children.
Oh yeah, that's the Simpsons.
And it's using the word children in a way that it makes you emotional, and so whatever I say next, you're going to fall in line with what I say, because I'm saying, somebody think of the children.
It's inarguable.
It's inarguable.
And I think they were like trying to string up Mr. Burns or something. That was Reverend Lovejoy's wife, and she did not. That by content, her saying that had actually no relationship to what was happening. Right. It was a completely not even.
That's right.
Not even related at all, but it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Because it was that functional talisman of getting people to emotionally go along.
Right.
With what
you have them by the hook when you do that, and so part of this whole lexicon is you flood, or you have an auditory bombardment of this word, and you see this word community everywhere.
I know.
It is on billboards. We used it. Yeah, we're trying to not anymore, but it's sort of embedded in what we do already, so we'll make the most of it. But you become less sensitive to it, first of all. So if someone just says community, then you don't really think about it much anymore. You just kind of go with it. And then you become sympathetic to it, like you're willing to accommodate it. even like in stores, I've seen it where they are positively trying to push something evil on you. They are using this word to get you to buy into it. So you're less sensitive to it. Then you're sympathetic to it, and then once that happens, then you're willing to sacrifice for it. Even your children.
Yeah. Wow.
I would say.
Well, on that note.
So there's a lot there. So that was my punchline. That was like the end of the episode, but we can flesh more of that out. But that word, it becomes so grave, and it makes a difference in so many people's lives.
Yeah.
Like this gentleman that emailed us, like, what do I do? Do I leave my community? You know?
Yeah.
Like, is that possible? Can I be a good human and do that?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people need permission to be able to stand outside of this word that has not been defined, but is used everywhere. And we're supposed to like drop everything at the hat.
It does carry a hefty dose of moral obligation.
Yeah.
At least on an emotional level.
Yeah.
And this is, we really just started off with like all of the bad things.
Well, I was going to start with the good things.
There are pros. That's not how it's outlined. We were going to talk about the goods of community.
Yeah, and I want to do that.
Yeah, but that's, it is helpful to see, well, it couldn't be manipulated if it weren't a good thing, right? And that's why it is such a useful tool for manipulation.
Well, and it's become such a grave problem too.
It's irreproachable.
Yeah, and it's the gravity of it, I think, needs to be felt amongst people. And so maybe hooking them first by seeing that like people make huge life decisions over this word sometimes is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Head in hand bear I, bedecked with bays and rosemary.
How many people do you know who are building their home culture around seasonal harvest and feasting? Or that are hunting as you are for self-sufficiency and back-to-the-land values? Or that share your artist's passion for human-scale meatcraft? At FarmsteadMeatsmith.com, we've created a community of hundreds of omnivores from around the world with these shared goals, and 2 major places for them to learn from and inspire one another. First, we have our semi-annual hands-on educational event, The Family Pig, here at our Heartland homestead in Oklahoma. Come meet Brandon, get your elbows greasy, and over the course of 3 days, kill, cut, cure, and cook 2 pigs completely. You'll rub those greasy elbows with other meatsmiths from around the country, sharing meals and conversations to inspire you for years to come. Secondly, for more remote learning, over at FarmsteadMeatsmith.com, we host a purely digital membership program with an archive of film and textual resources 5 years deep now. And both our on-site classes and online program include access to our most unique and rewarding private community Facebook page, Meatsmith Table, which is the only international network by and for homesteaders harvesting animals on a domestic scale using traditional and regional methods. We've been told that our classes are life-changing and the membership program unparalleled in quality and quantity. To get a taste of our education, search FarmsteadMeatsmith.com and our YouTube channel for our free films, conversations, and downloads. Explore how we and other meatsmiths across the globe may best come alongside you and support you in building your home around the harvest. Please head to FarmsteadMeatsmith.com today.
And I've seen it, it's weird, we're all, especially traveling around, going to small farms, and again, people who, they feel like islands, they're trying to do small scale agriculture and live an ordered life, connected with nature and all of these wonderful things. So they already feel rather isolated. And so community has an even greater appeal, and it holds a lot of promise. Man, things could be a little easier. And so I've seen lots of various efforts over the years to create community. And it's all very interesting because they're all very distinct. It really depends. Sometimes people gather around, particular Native American spiritual rites. Sometimes people gather around an idea that food should be free, which is something I've actually heard before. And sometimes, there's just so many things that people try to muster and fabricate a community around. And because of that, it's very unclear what community is. What is it even?
Yeah.
And that's part of the challenge, I think, is we just don't have a good definition.
Okay, well, let's get into that then. Let's first talk about the pros. What do communities offer to the family? Or if we want to help things out, what's a good society? Why is the family a part of society at all? Or what does the society offer to the family? And I have some ideas here. But there's agrarian communities, there's farm communities, there's church communities, there's work communities, people who are part of a bigger corporation, they develop their own community. But
there's jiu-jitsu communities.
Yeah, exactly. Homeschool mom co-ops, that kind of thing. I would say it prevents isolationism, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
We were just listening to something a minute ago. Humans are social creatures.
Yes, we are by nature.
And so we have to be a part of it. It's God's will that we live in societies.
Yeah.
And it would make God absurd to think that living in temporal society would be a hindrance to our salvation.
Yeah.
And I didn't come up with that. That's Father Thomas Crane. And he wrote a book called Integralism and the Common Good of the Community. There's a podcast about that. But
especially if you are a Trinitarian Christian, then community is in the divine Godhead. It's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Okay.
So that, and if we are created in that image, then that is the elemental basis of community. And that's, even Joe mentions that, he says that it's critical. He calls it, being with like-minded folks rather than the rugged individualist perseverance. And I've kind of experienced some of that, that was part of, not all of, but part of the reason for leaving Washington State for us. And the way I ended up framing it was, we could stay here and do the rugged individualist perseverance. Literally, we would be an island, and or we could go to a place where, like he says, people are a little more like-minded. And for me, it was more of a strictly practical consideration. I'm thinking of my kids.
Yeah.
Who are they going to get jobs with locally? Who are they going to hang out with, develop relationships with? Who are they going to marry? And if my entire community is utterly crippled by a particular narrative that has predominated the fearscape for the past 2 years, and every value is subject to that immaculate immunity, supposedly, including religion and worship and friendship and everything, then I do not have like minds with that, and I can't subject my kids to it.
Well, there's no community anymore.
Which is, that can be the, like Joe says, that can be the conflict that you're caught in the middle of. Is, okay, I could just anchor down. I could just put up big walls and we could just stay here and hold our breath and make it work.
Well, and you and I could, well, maybe more than a decade ago, we could hunker down and live kind of quietly and kind of penitentially, but our kids, they need
our children, and I really think of it just super practically. Like for those that are supposed to be married, they do need spouses.
Yeah,
like that's a requisite. But when I actually think of you and I, because we are actually the elemental unit of a community. So I don't need anyone else. If I could just hang out with you and the kids, and we could go to mass, I'm good on the community. Speaking of, I could survive that quite well.
Yes.
But because that in itself, that is what, in the end, communities are made of.
That's right.
So you're not necessarily outside of a community or completely isolated as an individual if thou hast a family.
That's right.
That is the essence of community. Is the family.
Okay, so I'm going to just jump ahead because we're all over the place already.
Yeah,
anyway.
that was how we do.
Yeah. So Professor Plinio Correa de Oliveira, he is the founder of Tradition, Family, and Property, tfp.org. Okay, and I will make sure I link to a couple of different articles. You can also go to traditioninaction.org. There's a number of different articles there, and I love their articles because they're short. And they're really bite-sized. But I'm just going to quote from this one. To define the human body as an ensemble of cells is folly, but to define it as an ensemble of organs is a great truth. Indeed, the human body is not just constituted of cells, but of cells that are part of organs. What properly makes up the human body are organs. Analogously, to say that human society is principally constituted of individuals is a similar absurdity. Society is composed primarily and essentially of families. These, in turn, are formed by human persons. The family is the primary matter of society. Before all else, in human society, we encounter persons living in a family. Only secondarily does the individual appear. So it doesn't erase the individual. It's not communistic. But as far as the person in society, like before God, you are an individual. You have to account for your, autonomy and what you've done with your life. But in society, I think he's right on. And he's a Brazilian academic of the 20th century, very conservative. And he's got a number of different articles that really talk about traditional views that have been lost. Yeah. Specifically regarding the family, tradition, and property. So, but I thought that was kind of what you were getting at as far as the family is the community. Especially when you start getting into how God himself has ordained that his grace will flow
through the family.
I've started saying recently to people, like, you don't get grace through the community.
This is technically true.
If we're going to be precise.
Going to be precise. Because, and the way we'd be precise about it on the positive end, the reason you get grace through the family is because of sacramental marriage.
Yes.
So it's literally the mechanism. It's not actually a vague thing. It's not actually a thing that we have to wonder about. Where is this positive formation coming from? Or this, not happiness, but joy, or the eudaimonia, like Aristotle talks about, right? The laying on and seizing hold of the good and actually possessing it. It's actually not a vague and mysterious thing. We know objectively where it comes from, and it is the sacrament of marriage, which is, that's the definition of the sacrament. It's an outward sign instituted by God to give grace. And that grace is a created share in the divine life of God. So it's not just God has good favor for you, like he likes you.
Yeah.
It's no, you're actually partaking of his divine life, which is Trinitarian.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that is why you're actually able to do things that are beyond the capability of nature.
That's right.
Of a group of people who are even just living naturally. Grace is a totally supernatural gift. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually beyond what we can do by our strategizing, by our super intelligent crafting of community or even family life. Mm-hmm. And I would say even to fulfill our natural ends, we need grace.
That's right.
And that is actually the basis of the community.
Yeah. Well, if you're talking
it's the
about
divine life of God.
Yeah. And Father Thomas Crean, I hope I'm getting that right. All my notes are everywhere. He talks about how society is composed, or human society is composed of the temporal order and the supernatural order. Mm-hmm. And he says that the temporal order cannot even survive on its own terms. Mm-hmm. That we need, and we're seeing that in this world, this culture.
Yeah.
People are trying their hardest to live naturally. Mm-hmm. Even people that are like, I'm trying to live organically and all natural, it's not possible on many levels. We're either going pagan or we're committing murder somewhere or all kinds of things are going wrong. So why did I bring that up? Just the natural level needs grace.
Yeah.
And also on a practical level, grace, and I know I've defined this before on this podcast, but grace literally is the enlightening of your mind, the ordering of your passions, and the strengthening of your will.
Yeah.
So if you want some more of that, you need a sacramental marriage. Mm-hmm. And
right.
And then the family, that is how, when you live in accordance with that order that God created, the graces will flow
continually.
Yeah, and you can see better, and you can think better, and speak better.
That's the amazing thing about the sacrament of marriage, that it's kind of distinct from others, except for the Eucharist, which is that it's not just at that moment, right? Like ordination. Well, ordination, I guess, would be that too. But it's the grace continues.
Sure. Yes.
Beyond the exchange of vows before a witness who is a priest.
Yeah.
It actually continues throughout the life of the marriage, which lives until you die. So it's all the way through.
The vows. Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm getting at too, is you don't get that kind of grace in community. It comes through family and marriage.
Grace in community gets that kind of grace from the family.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
So it's actually the family is the more essential unit.
Okay, and then that
is building up.
Yes, exactly. So that leads me into another positive that community can give you, or maybe you're giving it to the community. I don't know. Is the fourth commandment. The fourth commandment, which is honor your father and mother, it includes Patria, love and honor to one's own country. And that's a virtue. It's a natural virtue. And what that means is seeking the welfare of your society. And that's a thing.
Yeah.
You got to do it at some level. But at some level, we are obliged to take active part in works of good citizenship for the public or common good. And we can talk about the common good.
Yeah.
But that's another way that community or society is, it has to be a part of your life. You can't just, wipe it off.
That's right. Because I think you actually have not necessarily... I don't know, maybe I would shift the emphasis, because I feel like community is mostly emphasized for what it can give you.
Yeah.
And I think it actually needs to be shifted. You actually have duties to the society, to the community, and
but not in a communistic way.
yeah, right.
And here's the thing too. I don't think you're really ready to give to the community, to the culture, the country, unless you've gone through the crucible of family life. Like if I had considered myself really hopeful when I was in my early 20s, I would have messed things up worse. Do you know what I mean? Whereas now that I've gone through being a mother and a homesteading wife, and I understand a little bit more. And so I just wouldn't have trusted myself to give back to the country or whatever, the culture.
Well, it purifies you, because it's super easy to do good things for your community or for your society for the wrong reasons or for ambition. And you need grace to sort that stuff out, because those things are a result of an imbalance of your appetites, right? Yeah. And so if you can actually, again, through grace, enlighten the intellect, straighten the will, and order the appetites, then you don't have those things to muddy the works, to mar your labor, as Shakespeare would say, anymore. It's... there's a lot there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is like that backlog of grace. Like when I'm 60, not that I'm going to do this, but like I just would not consider myself at all helpful, until I've gone through and I understand, for instance, the value of life, the value of patience. Like there's no way I could be part of a community project unless I had really understood patience, or a budget, or, even just natural things, much less like supernatural goods.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think also going through and being a part of community is you're allowed to learn the social virtues, which there are virtues out there that, you only get in society. You can only acquire them with other people. So virtues like generosity, or, you can be generous with God. You don't need another person for that. But, works of mercy, works of charity, friendship, justice. Like you need all these virtues in order to be a full person. Aristotle talked about this, but also when you stand before God, like you need to have these virtues, and
those are social.
Those are social
by definition,
right? Yeah. Another thing that came up was God parenting is a church-sanctioned communal reality.
Yeah.
Even though the primary end of a God parent is to ensure the spiritual goods of the person you're, praying for.
Right, which I think is actually the most concrete, ironically perhaps, common good of community, which is, it's actually spiritual goods. And that's one of the things that I think is a subtle shift that can make community confusing, is that we tend to think of community as the sharing of material goods. And I think that there can be smaller clubs around that. And that, of course, makes sense. Farmers will band together and jointly utilize a tractor or something. I'm not opposed to that at all. But if you're going to talk about in the strict sense, what is the common good? Specifically those goods that are enjoyed by everyone in community. They have to be those goods that are not diminished in their use.
So, okay, we need to find that more. What you just gave away, the golden term.
Oh.
Yeah. What is a common good?
I think a common good is, it's more like a spiritual good. It's something that it can be shared, because when you consume that good, when you use it, it's not diminished.
Yes.
It doesn't reduce Like a bag of popcorn, you can share a bag of popcorn, but it's not a common good. It is yours. So it doesn't belong to everyone. It belongs to you, and you share it with people. And the reason it's not necessarily a common good is because it disappears as people eat it.
Or the more you get, the less I get.
Yeah.
Right.
Like a cake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I have a whole cake and then I want to share it with you, now I only have half a cake.
Yeah.
And so on.
Yeah. So it's diminished as you share it.
And that would be a private good.
Yes.
Those things.
Yeah.
That's different.
Yeah.
And you can share those.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
You should. Probably shouldn't force you to share it, though.
That's right.
That's where we get into the problems.
Yeah.
Is when we put such a high value on the sharing of consumptible goods, of material goods that in their utilization are consumed. It's such a good thing that we're now going to force you to share it because you have a little more. And if you could just give what you have, that material good, to these other poor people over here, then they won't torch your house, and we can all be happy about this.
Yeah.
So you can see where that leads.
Yeah.
When we think of when we take actually what are private goods and we make them the common good.
Yeah.
That's when that's when the government tells you can't slaughter your own pig because it's the common good. It's like,
See, precision.
Yeah.
We have to be. And also, this is not just what we think. This is Thomas Aquinas. So it's a little more authoritative, I think.
yeah.
The tradition,
My understanding
the
of Thomas,
tradition has
which is-
spoken. Well, no, I've gotten it from a number of different sources. This is his definition
Yeah.
of common good,
Yeah.
and it's stuck around. But we also have forgotten it. So we gotta bring that back into the discussion.
Yeah.
It makes a difference.
Yes. So what would be examples of common good then? Actual common good, not private good. And I think it's, there's a lot of those. There's actually a lot of common goods.
Yeah.
That are not diminished at all.
Yeah. When you share them,
Yeah.
they're not diminished.
When they're being shared.
So truth.
Truth is a common good.
Yeah. If I have a truth and I'm sharing it with you, I don't have less of the truth. Same thing with justice.
Yeah.
Even like victories in sports games. Like if we're on a team sport and I've won and you've won, we're not like less winners.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is those more ideas.
Yeah. And I would even say that the sharing of private goods, which again is super possible, but it should be understood as sharing, as an act of charity, I guess.
Yeah.
Those can be even understood. Those are understood better if they are utilized to the end of a common good. So like I think of, roads and stuff. There is a common good there, and that is movement. Movement is not diminished when it is shared. We can move. That is a good. We can drive around. Moving around, movement is a power. That is a good thing. But we do need some material means to achieve that kind of movement. And so we have roads and stuff. But I think it's helpful to think of those things. They're still common. They're still common goods, even though they have some material support.
Yeah, I think actually we would call them something like, I'm trying to come up with the word, like a corporate
good.
private good, or
Yeah,
something
right.
like that, like a collective good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is called something. We define it differently.
Yeah.
But it does have its own.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't write that one down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you see that throughout. There's versions of that. But even those collective goods have to serve the common good to be valid or just or
Yes.
worth doing. And you'll see that throughout history both ways, you know, like in France in the 14th century, they had some collective rights to certain fields or which was a collective good, or to certain tools. And today what that looks like in France is they share tractors. Or it's more of a sharing. It's a collective good. And it's you're part of this particular group of farmers that has done this to the common good of agriculture, you know, of nourishment.
Yeah.
And you can also do that super bad wise. Right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because I remember I've actually talked to a Frenchman about this, and he's like, it's not communism. We've been doing this since the 1300s. Like this is way older than communism. And I think it's just because they have it rightly ordered to a collective good, ordered to the common good. Whereas when you're a materialist or a naturalist in the communistic framework, which is officially that, then all you have are private material goods.
Yeah.
That's all you've got.
Yeah.
And you're not ordering it towards the common good, which is truth or anything. I don't even know what they're ordering it towards.
Yeah.
Equality.
Yeah. Fraternity.
Yeah, or something.
Yeah.
And that's when you get the actual stealing of justified government-sponsored robbing of resources, of private goods, and then the redistribution of them for others. And that doesn't work out so well for the common good.
Yeah.
Historically speaking.
Yeah. Thank you again, Meatsmiths, for listening to our take on all things meat making, householding, and culture keeping. We hope it's helped you in growing your home around the harvest.